guys, Miss Wissinger here to help you read The Missing Ingredient, Love. And what we're looking for here is we're looking for where the author talks about proposing a solution to the problem. I'm going to point out some, but then it's going to be your job to go back into the text and find some more. Let's start reading. When the Chicago Teachers Union struck back, it helped further a vision of a different future. The teachers, parents, students, and community were dreaming and acting big. The fight in Chicago was led from the beginning by African American and Latino parents, students, and community organizations in alliance with educator groups. Together, they have forged a new Chicago model of resistance. Neoliberal hegemony rests in part on the conviction that there is no alternative to the market, and there is no other way to imagine society. Lippman and Gutstein have written. What is emerging in Chicago is a reaffirmation of public education with values of fairness, justice, democracy, interdependency, and the common good. Lippman describes witnessing parents, students, and teachers in the streets during the 2012 Chicago teachers' strike, holding homemade signs expressing their demands and dreams. We need more art, more music, more gym. We need air conditioning. Stop the testing. Schools are not businesses. Our children are not products. Teachers have had enough. Students have had enough. Teachers have had enough. We're standing up. We're saying no. Enough. Lippman says that the teachers' strike in Chicago ignited people across the country. It gave an example nationally of what a social movement teachers' union could look like, and it provided a national example that we could actually organize to fight these things. Just as importantly, it has really sparked the beginnings of very similar campaigns in a number of cities around the country. So that's an idea of a solution-based issue, right? They're talking about how it gave an example of what social movements could look like from the teachers' union. So that's talking about a solution that the other teachers' unions nationwide could incite. So that could be something that we're focusing on. Jackson Potter of the CTU itemizes some highlights of the current public education movement. New militant teacher union leadership just elected in LA and Massachusetts, open bargaining with parents in St. Paul. Takeovers of the Board of Education in New York City and Chicago, Pittsburgh rejecting charter expansion, to name a few. Student unions have joined teacher unions on the front lines. In 2014, the Philadelphia Student Union, the PSU, led thousands of students in a walkout of classes to protest teacher firings, school closings, and the slashing of extracurricular programs. University of Pennsylvania researchers Jerusha Connor and Sonia Rosen chronicled that the PSU is pioneering a new style of youth activism. PSU members work hard to flip the script by altering how young people are portrayed in the media and viewed by the general public. Framing youth as empowered agents of change fundamentally contradicts the discourse of neoliberal education reform. Neoliberal ideologies view these mostly low-income, mostly Black and brown urban youth as undeserving beneficiaries of a wasteful system. In this model, young people are positioned as both the cause of the problem and the objects of reform. They become spectators in a show that repeats itself with each new crisis. Youth organizing, on the other hand, disrupts this pattern of spectatorship. Instead of remaining the objects of reform efforts, PSU members who view themselves as organizers and leaders force their way onto the reform stage in order to play central roles in determining what changes are made in schools and across the district. Do we see any ideas of a solution that they might have made right there? I think we might. What do you think might be a solution that they just mentioned there? Who is making the change there? Think about that. Adorthus McDonald, an activist with Chicago's KOCO and a school parent, expresses the alternative vision of grassroots activists. We're not addressing the corporate agenda. We are addressing the neighborhood agenda, he insists. We need a new urban educational agenda for the 21st century, and we're not talking about charter schools. So right off the bat, we're talking about a new urban educational agenda. So let's see what kind of details we get into. We will not rest until every neighborhood grade school and high school has a world-class, state-of-the-art facility as well as becomes a community institution so that students of the community learn their history, as well as what they need to be college ready and beyond in the 21st century. John H. Jackson, president and CEO of the Scott Foundation for Public Education, which works to support equity in education, notes the significance of labor's reemergence in Chicago as an agent of radical change. There was a time over the last 5 to 10 years that there was a belief that labor couldn't and wouldn't push back, or that labor and community couldn't work together to push back. I think Chicago represents the reemergence of an impractical partnership where labor, civil rights, and community come together to try to create a better reality. Is that a solution? Labor, civil rights, and community coming together? I think that's solutions based. We don't see that happening enough, but it represents what's possible when it does happen. When it is happening, that's the solution. Jackson says that the CTU has had a significant impact, helping highlight big questions around resources and providing all kids the opportunities to succeed. If we keep schools open, how are we going to make them better? If we don't suspend our young people and we keep them in the schools, what are the additional supports? How do we get those? And how do we keep their communities safe? Chicago still has serious challenges, and policymakers are not presenting the type of policy proposals needed to solve them. The CTU is not only a fighting union, it offers a vision of what education in Chicago could look like. The schools Chicago students deserve is CTU's blueprint for school reform. Every student in Chicago public schools deserves to have the same quality education as the children of the wealthy, begins the report, which goes on to highlight research-based education that is fully funded and staffed in an equitable fashion throughout the day. They're talking about equity. They're talking about what the education deserves. And they're saying research-based education that is fully funded and staffed in an equitable fashion throughout the city. Could those be solutions to the problem? I think so. Community and youth activists view the CTU as a welcome new ally in a larger struggle for justice. Raul Botello, Associate Director of Communities United, a grassroots group in a largely Latino neighborhood of Chicago, says the CTU is playing a really critical role in not just public education, but in defining and recalibrating the scope of what public service is. Their message about equity and incorporating class and race into their rhetoric is something a lot of community organizations have been saying before. Many point to the CTU as the cutting edge of the broader working class struggle and fight against the war on the middle class. When a major labor union trumpets the message of community activists, it's a big elephant in the room, says Botello. The establishment has to respond to them. In some ways, they've catapulted a lot of the work that a lot of the movements in the past have been attempting to do or were doing already. Botello offers an example. We're trying to reform the school discipline code to be more than just suspensions and arrests in our school. And we were raising the issue of the school to prison pipeline. Previous union administrators would never touch that because the teachers are in the classroom, and in some ways, they're the biggest initiators of that discipline. But teachers' hands are tied. These are just bad policies. Solution-based again, right? Let's change those policies. Let's stop those suspensions and those arrests. When Karen Lewis and her team took the reins of CTU, says Botello, we didn't even have to convince them. This was something that inherently they believe, that Black and brown men and boys are being disproportionately kicked out of public schools. Education Secretary Arne Duncan, and Attorney General Eric Holder announced in January 2014 a federal initiative on discipline to address the school-to-prison pipeline. Noting that schools now suspend or expel 2 million students per year, Holder declared too often so-called zero-tolerance policies, however well-intentioned they might be, make students feel unwelcome in their own schools. They disrupt the learning process, and they can have significant and lasting negative effects on the long-term well-being of our young people, increasing their likelihood of future contact with the juvenile and criminal justice system. Botello notes that CTU has made crucial links between issues. What CTU has brought in as a much more explicit analysis of race and class and the policies that impact public education. But equally important is just their impact on the city as a whole. Lippman explains the connection. We have to challenge racism in order to fight neoliberalism and capitalism and defend public education in Chicago. We have to find ways for white parents to see that their concerns about schools are very much tied to what's happening to Black and Latino students. and that even when they are not facing school closures, racism, and privatization themselves, they have to stand up against it. Those things are intimately connected. Lippman notes that during the teacher strike, parents and students from some predominantly white schools joined protests against funding cuts, large class sizes, and testing. That sounds like solutions based to me, right? Everyone needs to come together. White parents, black parents, Latino parents need to realize that we're all in this fight together, right? So that's solutions based. One lesson from the Chicago struggle, Botelho observes, is that there must be more cross collaboration of movements, because I think it's taken a while. I think it took too long for the LGBT movement and the immigrant rights movement to come together, or the education folks working with civil rights groups. It's always good to start from your base and where you're at, but there could be a much more intentional, aggressive way to collaborate. There's so much richness to be learned from each other. That will only help everyone. That's solutions based as well. Parents don't just want high test scores, argues Lippman. They want their children treated with respect. They want to be treated with respect when they come to the school. They want the school to be a center of community. They want their school to have the full resources. We need a system of mutual accountability, she adds. While we're holding teachers accountable and schools accountable and parents accountable, we have never held the policymakers accountable, the corporations accountable, that deindustrialized whole areas of the city, moved elsewhere for cheap labor, and left a huge unemployed population, produced poverty, and affected the schools. The kind of accountability that we need is a collective community accountability, in which the communities and the schools set standards for what they want their children to have. Accountability for all? That sounds solutions based as well. Movements start from within the most affected communities and take the time to build on local leadership. The anecdote of the corporatization of our society is this type of organizing grounded in community. On the south side of Chicago, where the education wars have raged hottest, the future that we are working for is one that's rooted in self-determination, says Jidu Brown. I think that communities have to have the right to control the institutions that are in their neighborhood. If we don't have educated young people in our community, who becomes the dependable elected officials? Who becomes the teachers, principals in our community? Brown reflects, a missing ingredient that nobody talks about in all this is love. I know that when you are working with someone or a group of people that you love, you're going to work harder. You're going to pour in every resource because you care about them. You recognize that your future is linked to theirs. Living this truth about transformative organizing in September 2015, Jidu Brown and Bronzeville parents went on to lead a hunger strike, putting in every resource they had, and succeeded in saving Dyett High School. So, a multi-generational movement. A 9-year-old Asan Johnson marched alongside Jidu Brown as they demanded a strong community role in education decisions. Asan has taken his message from the streets of Chicago to a national stage. Every child deserves a great education. Every school deserves equal funding and resources, Johnson told a large crowd in Washington, D.C. at the 50th anniversary March on Washington. He said he was participating in the March for Education, Justice, and Freedom. Echoing Jidu Brown's call for local leaders, Karen Lewis has already endorsed Asan Johnson for mayor of Chicago in 2025 when he turns 21. In the struggle for the soul of public education, the next generation is already leading the fight. So what I need you to do now is I need you to mark down one model that I talked about, and now it's your turn. So what we're looking for is we're looking for solutions-based writing that was talked about within this piece. I'm pointed some out explicitly, some are implicitly pointed out, but make sure that you're pointing out at least 3 new solutions-based things that are discussed within the reading. Let me know if you need help.